Welcome, y'all. Here we are again, Switch for Good podcast. Thank you for joining us on our, we're almost at our 400th episode. So thanks for hanging in there. We do have a real treat for you all today. Ralph and I are really excited to introduce. We have two guests, and I want to introduce them and what we're going to talk about today because it's big. We're going big. We're going to tackle some seriously big topics today, people. So buckle up and get ready. Young people today are inheriting a world that they didn't design, right? They're inheriting a food system that is built entirely on profit rather than health, inheriting a climate crisis, and it's still being debated by the very people paid to deny it, and a cultural moment so saturated with noise and manufactured doubt that finding clarity feels like almost a monumental achievement. And yet, something extraordinary is happening in the middle of it all. While politicians keep cashing checks and playing dumb, a new generation of advocates has already moved on. They've read the research, they felt the consequences, and they're done waiting for action from institutions that have repeatedly failed them. Well, today's guests are Whitney and Gianna Klein, recent graduates of NYU and Cornell, who studied sustainability, the environment, and the relationship between what we eat and the world we're leaving behind. Through their work with Switch for Good, they're doing what we wish someone had done 20 or 30 years ago, or maybe longer, walking onto college campuses and actually moving the needle on how an entire generation thinks about our food system and what's at stake if we don't change course. So if you're scared about what's coming for yourself, for your kids, for your grandkids, this episode won't sugarcoat it, but it will introduce you to two individuals who refuse to look away. Remind you that you don't have to either, and I hope give you a reason to believe in a brighter future. So welcome, Lucy, Gianna. So happy to have you all on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Well, as I mentioned before we started recording, I've got the same question for both of you to start off with, and then we're going to go off into wild, wonderful tangents with each of you and your lanes of expertise. But for both of you, I want to know what first drew each of you to study sustainability, which is rare but not extremely rare. The rare part is you both chose to focus on food as the area that you wanted to, I guess I just said focus on, right? As it relates to our planet, what's happening to it, and sustaining it for many generations to come. So each of you, Lucy, why don't you go first? What made you choose this pretty narrow lane to major in and focus on?
Yeah, for sure. I first came into environmental studies and sustainability through my major's science requirement in college. I had a liberal arts major, so they made us do a little bit of everything. And I chose environmental studies to fulfill my science credits. And I took a really fascinating environmental studies course that framed the climate crisis as in part a result of European colonization throughout the hundreds of years that was happening. And that was mind-blowing to me. I didn't know that the climate crisis could be looked at in such a way and that we could actually understand how we got to this place in a way that was really holistic and looked at every part of our lives and our history. And then I, through connections from the NYU Environmental Studies Department, did a fellowship in learning about factory farming, how to become an anti-factory farming advocate, and got more into this world of food pretty much by chance, just by connections at NYU that led me down a path. And I found that I carried that same sense of curiosity about how all these things connect. And food is such a interdisciplinary sector of climate work. It touches not just climate, but it's so justice oriented. There's food justice, there's pollution, there's the animals, there's how we as people relate to the land and the air and the water. And I thought it was just so vast and I was never going to get bored. And I was learning so much. So I kind of just never stopped learning. I just kept asking the next question. And now we're here.
I can relate to that very much, that just continuing to be filled with curiosity and wanting to know the next fact or the next detail or what was happening. And one led me to another and another. And as I said, I want Gianna to answer the same question, but I just have a follow-up question, thought of that whole route that you just spoke of, that you traversed. Now, standing here today, doing the work that you're doing, is there something in that lineup of the reasons that you stated that you care so deeply about the environment and what happens to it? Is there one that just kind of rises to the top, or do you really equally feel the same about how bad it is what's happening to animals and people's health circling the drain, and our system that is complete opposite of the incredible work that you're pushing for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the strongest thread is probably how clear it is to me through thinking about the world from an environmental standpoint. Everything becomes clearer when I look at politics or even how my friends interact. If I just think about it in terms of like, where did they grow up? How do they think about the world? I find that I can always tell when someone has an ecology background from academics or just reading about it or spending a lot of time thinking about how ecosystems work. I think that ecosystem dynamic of interdependency and niches and feedback loops relates to how humans work as well. And I think that is so compelling to me and has helped me feel like I can find clarity in the world. And so I always tend to come back to that just in my own thoughts.
All right, you, Gianna, what first drew you into the world of sustainability, and why did food become a focus of that area?
Yeah, so for me, it originated with food itself and then extended into the sustainability side of things. So when I was 6, I had this sort of epiphany connecting the animals on our plate to what we're consuming and the fact that they are living beings. And so it originated as an ethical stance, and kind of diving deeper into the food system and the different elements involved in producing the food that we eat, specifically animal products.
Okay, so wait a minute. You just said 6 years old and epiphany in the same sentence, which is not common, I don't think. Real quick, or not real quick, tell me what happened.
Yeah, I have a very vivid memory of it, so I can definitely retell. I remember I was in my childhood home, sitting on the floor. We were watching cartoons, my brother and I. My dad came home with a bag of Subway turkey sandwiches, and that was not an uncommon thing. We opened our sandwiches, started eating, and I remember I looked down at the sandwich and took a bite of the turkey, and I was like, wait a second, like this was a living turkey. And as a 6-year-old, I've always been really connected to animals. I've always had a lot of empathy for living beings. And so in that moment, I made that connection. Obviously, as a 6-year-old does, it wasn't to the full extent that I understand it now, but that alone was enough for me to sit my mom down and say, hey, mama, like, I'm going to stop eating animals. So that's where it all started. And then I watched some documentaries at that age that were obviously very hard to see for a 6-year-old, for anyone, but for a 6-year-old especially. And that motivated what has since been my sort of life mission and passion for food systems and the role that it plays, not only in animal welfare, but also then I learned later on when I was 13, I put together a short film I wanted to dive deeper into factory farming. So I did a lot of spoken interviews and researched myself at that time, watched more documentaries, things like that, to really understand the impact of factory farming, obviously on animals, but then I learned how impactful it is on the environment. And I was absolutely mind blown and so upset that, being someone who was pretty immersed in nature at that point, I homeschooled for a time, and we did a lot of interactive nature related activities. And so being so connected, or what I thought to be connected to the environment, the natural environment, and not knowing these things was really upsetting to me. And so that ignited the passion I have for sustainability a lot more. And then I took a class in high school that was focused on environmental systems and societies. And that's when I was like, okay, this is what I want to major in college. And obviously I knew that food needed to be at the center of it, because obviously I have this personal passion, but on a broader scale, food to me is so important because I see it as an undeniable part of the climate crisis. It's one of the leading contributors of greenhouse gas emissions. It uses a lot of land and a lot of water to produce the animal products that we consume. And so knowing that, I knew I needed to put that at the center. Also because we as humans, there's a lot of lanes in sustainability, like more than I probably even know. But food specifically is something that as individuals, every person has to interact with the food system to survive. So I see it as one of the most effective lanes to make change and move the needle in the right direction.
One thing that I'm really curious about is, as we talk about the interaction of food systems and the realizations you had about not only the ethical part of it, but related to climate and sustainability, I'm really curious about the conversations you're both having with your peer groups. And if your generation looks at climate change and the climate crisis as a fixed, established reality, or are you guys having debates with your friends and your peers about what's causing it, what the solutions are? What's your take on the temperature of where that's all at right now, and people your age, how they're feeling about it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it obviously depends on who you surround yourself with. So people that were in the same course of study that I was in, obviously those conversations look a little different. But on average, I would say I tend to interact with kind of two classes of people. One group of people that are very concerned, know that it's a real problem, want to do something about it, but feel kind of hopeless and scared. And then another class of people that kind of turn a blind eye to it and say, well, everything's bad for us or bad for the planet or bad for something. So I can't even live my life if I think about all these things. Someone else will deal with it. So I do get a lot of that in my personal life. So there's a lot of intentional ignorance, I would say. But then there are a lot of people, I mean, there's actual research on it, like 60% of Gen Z ages 16 to 25 are worried, very worried about the climate crisis, and it's impacting their everyday lives. So I definitely encounter that in my own life, but there's definitely a good handful of people my age that don't want to deal with it. I don't know about you.
Yeah, very similar.
Where do you strike up these conversations to glean this, intel from your peers? I'll speak for, my generation. It doesn't come up ever unless you force it to come up, unless I force it to come up in the conversations. I recognize this, that there's some that are like, all the problems are they're too massive and we can't solve all of them. So just screw it. Like you said, Gianna. But when it does come up from other people, what kind of situations are you in? Are you eating? Are you seeing, an LA fire, on your in the television? Like what cases come up when they talk about, the planet? What are we going to do?
Yeah, I'll just jump in because of the LA fire reference. That was definitely created a dialogue around climate change that wouldn't have otherwise been there, mostly because I created that dialogue when it was happening, because a lot of people weren't connecting all of these intense environmental disasters to the climate crisis and human-induced actions. Like there wasn't a connection there, but I definitely had a lot of conversations around that. And I would say, yeah, at the dinner table is a big one. People are asking why I'm choosing the way that I am, and that is a part of it. So that comes up. I don't know what your experience is with that.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with the LA fires and big storms and heat waves. Where I live, we had a pretty big heat wave. I believe it was March. It got up to the 80s, and that doesn't happen until now, normally in June. So that was a moment where we talked about it. Also at the dinner table, also when people ask me about my work. And it's also comes up when we talk about other people's work and lives. I hear it come up kind of as a background fact of life, it sounds like, for a lot of people when they're saying, where do I want to live in my 20s? The climate and natural disasters comes up as a factor. When people are planning out if they want to have kids, I know that's a factor that people are thinking about. And it's kind of just brought up casually as like, well, what's it going to be like for them when they're 40? What's the world going to look like? How do I feel about that? So I think it's often in that realm of hopelessness, almost as like, this is a fact of life. Maybe hopelessness isn't the right word. It's just a fact of life. And some people feel kind of hopeless about it, and some people feel other ways. But it's widely accepted in the circles I run in. Heavy caveat.
Is it right? Right. I get a lot for people, there's been floods, famines, fires since Bible times. What are you talking about? Do you guys feel like you need to get a bit more specific with, I hear you, Lucy, who you're running with is on your team, most of them, but maybe professors, and we're going to talk plenty about your all's work with CAN, Campus Action Now, the Switch for Good program. But I'm curious about professors when you are trying to get into different universities, different colleges, and be able to spread the good work of CAN. Do you get pushback from that, let's say, generation? And what do you say specifically to, I don't know if the word is convince, because we don't need to run around convincing everyone, but to maybe make them just think again about why the planet is heating up?
That's a good question. And I do feel it sometimes, probably most with the professors. Sometimes we'll get, specifically when we bring up the food angle, there seems to be an acceptance of human caused climate change. Most professors that I have run across seem to be accepting of the science, accepting that this is a scientific consensus. That doesn't seem to be the issue. But when we get down to, like you were saying, the specifics of it, we say we're interested in having students engage with how the food system is contributing to this issue. And we bring up also strong science that shows that we need to reduce the herd size of cattle because cattle grazing and ranching takes up too much land to be sustainable. It's simply the purest form of the word sustainable. It's not sustainable. We can't keep doing that. It's not up to us. We can't think our way out of that problem. That's the carrying capacity of the planet. That can be a little more contentious. And I've found ways to bring it to them in a way that fits their discipline, or I think they'll hear. Sometimes I don't even bring up the climate for the climate's sake. I'll weave it in with economics or social policy or something that they know and are familiar with, talking about I think we can agree that having, 4 companies, huge corporations dictate not only their own corporate practices, but regulate themselves in terms of animal welfare standards and food safety standards. I think we can agree that that's a problem. So there's always something, but it can take a little while to dig out what they're specifically going to hear.
Yeah, I would agree that the biggest thing, I really do agree with everything you just shared, Lucy, but it's about finding common ground with the individual person or group of people that you're speaking with, because I think there's most of the time commonality in that we want a habitable world. We want a place that our kids can grow up in. And even if you're in the realm of sustainability and you're focused on a different avenue, there's still common ground between the goals of our work and the goals of their work. So I think it's about finding that and approaching it in the right way.
The curiosity I have is also getting deeper sort of into how food choices are connected to environmental issues. And one thing that I've noticed in going to things like SF Climate Week or LA Climate Week is how few panels and how few presentations and conversations at mixers and gatherings are centered around food systems, to the point of, I can be talking to a person about, clean tech and incredible sustainable energy sources and new electric vehicle technologies, et cetera, which I'm all very curious and passionate about. But when, they inevitably ask me what I do and I bring up Switch for Good and my career in food and nutrition and sustainability, it's kind of like this glazed look goes over their eyes. And I'm curious, as you have both studied this and you're both in this work with us, how are those conversations unfolding to you? What do you notice in people, maybe outside of, the people you roll with, when they're aware of all these other environmental issues, but when food comes up, do you notice there's sort of that deer in the headlights look, or like, I'm doing all the things, don't take away my bacon? Like, what's sort of the nature of those conversations regarding food? Do you get pushback? Do you get curiosity? Are people just sort of completely ignorant to it? What's your temperature on that?
Okay. I would say it, again, depends on the person, but food is so deeply personal. And that's something that is inevitable. Everyone has a different relationship with food, a different cultural approach to food. And so when you try to share even objective scientific information about the impact of those choices on these larger scale issues, people tend to feel defensive and feel attacked. And that's not the case when you're telling someone to ride their bike more as opposed to take airplanes. That's kind of just, okay, that is what it is. But food is something that, like I said, you interact with multiple times per day, and everyone has such a deeply personal relationship to it. So it becomes a deeply personal topic.
I also encounter some level of ignorance where it isn't very well known the extent to which it affects the environment. I've encountered a lot of, yes, I know that cows burn methane. And it's like, okay, do you know how much water this uses? Or do you know how much food we don't eat because we're feeding it to these animals? And do you really, how much of this do you really know? And then I'll echo everything Gianna said about how personal and threatening the food conversation can feel to people. I also think it is a conversation where the junction between individual action and collective action gets really hot and touchy for some people, where they feel like you're saying, Raphael, like, don't take away my bacon, I'm already doing so much, I'm a good person. And I think it's hard to kind of wrap your head around how much maybe limited power you have when you're going to the grocery store and you're being served options, and not just communicating to people the extent to which food affects the environment, but also how food works and what change in this sector looks like, because it looks really different than in transportation or energy. It needs its own innovation, which can be hard to learn. It takes a while.
It's possible some of our listeners are wondering why the two of you are on together. So you're both fantastic. But I think it's as we kind of go down this rabbit hole of young people that are your all's age and what they're thinking and feeling and doing and how they're behaving and acting potentially differently or not differently based on the climate crisis that we are experiencing. Lucy and Gianna, as I briefly mentioned in the beginning, run Switch for Good's Campus Action Now program, which is a service learning program. And we have reached almost 400 students, a little under that, at 30 campuses nationwide. And the two of them built this from the ground up from day one. And it's certainly one of our most successful programs. In how many people, somebody's having a party back there, and everybody understands that we're all in our own homes, so it's all good. But so I think I want to spend a few minutes talking about service learning, what it means, because I'm going to be the first to say, when you all brought it to Switch for Good, I was like, I've never heard of that. Because we didn't have it in Villanova where I went to school, and I don't even know if it was a model in those years. We won't say the year. So what is service learning? And then each of you maybe just tell us what your favorite thing about running the CAN program is, and what you're learning from the students.
Totally. So service learning is a pedagogy, which is just a fancy word for way of teaching. So it's a style of teaching where it happens at all levels of school. We work at the undergrad level predominantly, where we will either find a professor to partner with or a staff person at the university, and we'll work with them to tailor service projects to their students. So these are semester-long projects in the real world. So the students are in a class like environmental science or sustainable business or applied ethics. We work really across disciplines. And they're in their classroom, they're taking tests, they're learning core principles of the field. And then additionally, they're working with us on a project over the 10 or so weeks of the semester. So the projects have a real world impact. So they'll be going out talking to people in their community about soy milk access in schools or coffee shops. they'll be hosting events on campus to educate their peers about exactly what we were just talking about the effect of food on the climate and water, etc. They'll be doing something that also reinforces and materializes their classroom learning so that they can come away feeling like they've owned a project, they have done something themselves, and they understand in a real way what they just learned in their classroom. So we're teaching them skills to be advocates no matter what they go on to do. They know how to talk to people about these issues. They know how to communicate their ideas to people in a real way. So that's service learning in the way we do it. There's also a lot of different stylistic choices across programs. So that's kind of the way we do it. I think my favorite part of the work is seeing it is so gratifying when a student genuinely reflects on the growth they've experienced and they share how they see themselves after the project. I've read and heard them say many times things like, I didn't know that I was capable of this. I didn't know that I could have such an impact. I feel so much more a part of my community. I feel like I've contributed something. I know one way to make the world a better place. I feel less hopeless. That is so fulfilling to hear. I really actually can't overstate it. It's like so amazing to know that a student has been empowered.
Yeah, I think that was really well explained, because service learning, when I explain my job to people, when Lucy and I speak with professors and students at the very beginning, people are like, what the hell is service learning? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I always just say it's a form of experiential, hands-on learning with a community partner organization, and we are the community partner organization in this case. What I would definitely agree that I love that about service learning. What I have found really rewarding is when students, both in our conversations and in the reflections that we have them do at the end of each semester, will share how this was, obviously it is more work technically for them, but that this was a refreshing break for them from their schoolwork that sometimes feels pointless and sometimes feels like it is doing nothing for anything really. And so feeling like they're doing a project that is tangible and that is real and that is contributing to advancing the cause of this organization, and just seeing them learn more about the food system, because a lot of them go into it with no context and understanding of the relationship between the food system and whatever avenue they choose to focus on related to it. But yeah, just the fact that this extra work that they are inevitably doing is something that they appreciate and enjoy in addition to their work, because it feels real.
One thing I'm curious about is beyond the scope of obviously educational empowerment and them really being challenged to expand their boundaries and work on new things. Have you received any feedback of any, shifts in their personal life? Like, do you have students come in that say, like, as a result of doing this work, I've now reconsidered for myself my own eating habits, my own diet, my own perception of food? Have you guys invited that, or just maybe off the cuff just received that from anyone?
Off the top of my head, this past semester, we had a student who initially was not vegan and now is at the end of this project. So that was something obviously very rewarding to see over the course of this work. We've had a lot of students leave comments in their feedback about how now they choose non-dairy milk in their coffee orders, and how they've influenced their roommates to only buy non-dairy milk, and how they're shifting towards more plant-based recipes and some of the recipe projects they got to really get hands-on with food. And that has led them to try new foods that they never would have, that they mentioned to us that they continue to implement in their lives.
That's super cool. This is a bit of a macro level question, but it's something that came up. I was traveling for the past 12 days and had some really interesting conversations around food systems and personal identity and the language and terminology that we use to describe, our ethical frameworks and whatnot. And one of the things that arose was, for a litany of reasons, that a lot of people perceive the word vegan as a 4-letter word. It's something that various people are reticent to describe themselves as, and I'm having more and more of these conversations that people don't want to use the word. And with the students that you guys recruit and work with, and in your own personal lives, do you find that is a touchy word? Do people shy away from describing themselves as vegan? Is plant-based or plant-powered? Or what are you guys noticing in terms of the lexicon that people are using?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's definitely a connotation with vegan that we feel. So we tend to lead with dairy-free and plant-based at the start before we've gauged the kind of atmosphere of whatever situation we're in. And then whatever suits the situation best is what we go with. So a lot of the times, if our students are working with the dining staff at their university to maybe rethink some of the recipes they provide in their dining halls, plant-based, plant-forward are stronger words in that context. In more direct advocacy work or community building or trying to find people through identity, sometimes vegan works better because it's more of an identity marker. And so people might go for that word over plant-based. So it's definitely present. I personally, this is like a style choice as a educator facilitator. I usually hold off on sharing my personal diet, the fact that I'm vegan, because I want them to go through all their thoughts beforehand and not have that connotation with me. I really want to be seen as a neutral facilitator for a while. And then as we get towards the end and I know that they've had that chance to think it through themselves, then we can kind of have that more casual conversation of like, how do you think about this in your life and what are you going to do about it? So yeah, it's a process of gauging for sure.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a heavily stigmatized word, and so I treat it as such. So I would say both in my personal life and with Campus Action now, I tend not to lead with it, like Lucy mentioned. And it, again, depends on the audience, but I think it's more about like the messaging around what we're talking about and the themes that surround it. But I do think that word, at least at first, can close people off. So I tend not to lead with it.
There is nothing more frustrating than feeling like your body is working against you. Digestive troubles, gut pain, skin issues, constant congestion, yet never knowing what's causing these issues. If that sounds familiar, it's time for you to take our new gut health quiz. In just 3 minutes, you will find out if dairy is behind your symptoms like diarrhea, heartburn, constipation, bloating, acne, or the never-ending mucus. And here's the good news. There is a solution. You don't have to keep living with these symptoms. Take the quiz, get answers, and start feeling like yourself again. Take the 3-minute gut health quiz today at switch4good.org/gut-health-quiz. Again, that's switch4good.org/gut-health-quiz and start feeling better today.
Lucy, I've talked to you about some of the relationships in your life that you have, the people that are not vegan, and some of them you've been friends with since a very long time, and some are newer. But I love and respect that about you, and I try to implement that more in my life because I have not been vegan since birth. So when I was your age, I was not vegan, and I kind of took a look at who I'm surrounding myself and who I'm surrounding and my peer group after I had some conversations with you, Lucy, and I realized, oh my gosh, right, they're kind of, I think they're all vegan, not all of them, but like a lot of them. And it really encouraged me to step out, like re-step out of that box after that I stepped in. And I think I am, or I know that I'm able to grow more and be more effective and have a more compassionate language in the way that I speak about it by seeking out and experiencing people that are, eating all sorts of different things besides just that. I don't know why that one lane of what we eat, specifically veganism, tends to kind of shut us down and become so polarizing. I think mostly it's probably because our hearts break every time, just a little bit or a lot of it, depending on how sensitive you are, right? When the person across from you is like eating your friend in a sandwich, maybe it's Subway, Gianna, but it's painful. And the older I get, the more I tend to steer away from pain. I kind of went right into it when I was younger and was like, all right, what can I handle? And now I'm like, I can't handle much anymore. So I just steer myself. But I really, really have learned from you on that, and have kind of sent out more tentacles, experience more people, more people's journeys, that they're having with food. And I think that's important. We can all learn from you and Gianna in that lane, or many lanes. So I'm curious. Ralph is always the most curious one, but do you feel like your peers want the same set of things that previous generations wanted, or do you feel like priorities are shifting for your generation on what they want their life to, what they want their craft, their life like, what they, how they want to live and their future?
That is a daunting question, but I'm gonna take a go at it. I think from what I've observed, I think it's probably pretty similar, but I think are pretty conscious that the world has changed a lot. I remember very distinctly, I had a conversation with my mom once where I was kind of thinking about this, and I asked her, I was like, this feels like a bad moment to me, whatever moment we were in. I just said, this feels like bad moment in the world. Do you think that too? And she said something like, I don't think it's necessarily worse, but it's definitely different. She was saying that she was feeling that too. And I think maybe that's how I see it a bit. I think we all want safety and community and access to our needs and like a little bit of leisure time and friends and joy and love and family and food, good vegan food. And I think it feels like with things like the climate crisis and how much access to information we have as a generation we've been able to learn the extent of some of these problems so easily. We haven't been, had to been taught. We could have gone onto the internet and found it out ourselves. And sometimes it's served to us by an algorithm. I think it feels like, okay, we're going to have to work for this. This is not just, nobody's doing this for us. And I think that feels maybe a little different from past generations, but I have only ever been the age I am, if that makes sense. I've only ever been my generation, so I can't speak too much to it. But Gianna, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree the scope is limited, obviously, given our limited experience. But while I do think, like you said, Lucy, there are some overarching similarities of like, we want a safe and clean environment. We want a world where we can live, period. But I think the way to achieve that and the way to maintain that is something that past generations have not had to think about in the way that we do. And that's because people weren't aware of the climate crisis in the way that we are now. And I feel like a lot of the anxiety that our generation is feeling comes from the fact that we kind of feel like, and I don't want to speak for our entire generation, but from my observations and myself and my peers, like it kind of feels like it falls on us a little bit. And so having that huge, quite literally existential crisis to tackle is something that I don't think past generations have had to confront in the same way. Obviously, like you said, Lucy, that different bad things have happened in the world that different generations have had to confront. But in this way, I think our priority for survival and addressing this crisis in this way is definitely something that we are experiencing in a unique way, for sure.
Well, I think the other tone that is coloring all of this is something we've had, I think, some passionate discussions about within Switch for Good, but also something that I continue to go deeper and deeper into, which is this idea of the meta crisis and this framework of systemic transition, systemic collapse. And you mentioned sort of this existential considerations around what it means to be alive right now, specifically your generation. I remember logging onto the internet for the first time in like 1994 and feeling like it was just going to be this quantum leap forward in terms of humanity, which it has been. But now, as we are rapidly in the unfolding of the age of AI, we're seeing a lot of really interesting diametrically opposed perspectives on that. On one hand, with AI, we see data centers being tried to be pushed through in places like Salt Lake City and Saline, Michigan in the South, and residents raising up and trying to oppose these giant data centers that are going to be consuming so much energy and water, that part of the sustainability conversation. But I'm deeply curious, what both of your thoughts are on AI. What concerns you the most? What excites you the most in terms of its impact on the environment, careers, relationships? This is a big question. I'm asking a big question. Where are you both at in terms of AI? What are your feelings about it currently? And what kind of future do you think it's going to create for humanity?
Okay.
Not big questions at all. You're just chill.
We warned you at the beginning.
Stick your feet up.
We just, grab a beer, kick back, get a kombucha. Let's go there. Let's for real. Like, I want to hear from both of you. Like, how are you really feeling about this gargantuan tectonic shift in humanity and the world?
Yeah, it's definitely gargantuan. I think that's a good word. And tectonic. I think that's really good words. I think many things. I also am aware of how limited my knowledge is. I am not, I think, intrinsically a technologist. I'm not a techno-optimist. But that doesn't mean I don't use technology all the time. I love technology too. I think I'm definitely concerned about the environmental, when we talk, it's kind of funny talking about dairy. Water usage is such a big part of what dairy does, and now water usage is coming up again in a different context with these data centers and how much water is used to cool them. So I think that's something kind of interesting that's happened in conversations I've had with students. Is it's kind of almost helped me teach to be like, yes, about this issue in the data center context. Let me tell you about it in the dairy context too. But that's an aside. I think, so that's concerning to me. I have a good friend who works in clean energy. He's a clean energy analyst, policy analyst. There's many words in his job title. And he shares some concerns he has with me about this is going to probably entrench the fossil fuel system. We have, solar and wind and hydro have exploded in the past couple of years. It is so cool to see that solar is cheaper than fossil fuels. That is so awesome. I'm so buoyed by that fact, but I'm also aware that this explosion of electricity demand is going to entrench the system that hasn't yet been shifted over to renewable energy. So that's concerning. I'm also a big reader. I love reading. It's probably the most important thing to me in my life is reading. And from that perspective, I'm concerned by LLMs. More so, I know there are tons of different ways AI are used, and many of them have nothing to do with LLMs. I'm concerned with LLMs in the way that language is being changed and used, and I think there's kind of a limit maybe to how much we can learn from each other. I think reading is it's how I learn about other people. It is how I've built my empathy and practiced my empathy since childhood, and being challenged by these stories and challenged by putting myself in another person's shoes. And it concerns me, to see that novels are getting published that have opaque AI citations. That maybe they're all written by AI and nobody really knows. And I think that's scary to me in terms of literature is so beautiful and powerful, and what's going on? Does anybody really know what's going on there? Because that seems really concerning. So that's a scattering of my thoughts. None of that was connected and probably didn't really answer the question, but those are the top of the surface of my thoughts right now about AI.
Yeah, that is a huge question. I think obviously I have a very personal and inevitably biased opinion, given that I work with college students in education. My mom is a teacher for elementary school students, so I've sort of seen the impact more specifically on education. I think the use of AI and whether it's good or bad is very context dependent. I see how it can be a tool. I see its efficacy in terms of efficiency, in terms of giving people time to allocate to more impactful areas in their work, in their personal life, things like that. But I would say overall, I am definitely skeptical, and I'm not personally, honestly, the biggest fan of it in a general sense, especially seeing how much less, students of all ages and starting from legitimately first grade are using their brain in such a limited capacity compared to before AI existed in the way that it does and to the extent that it does. Like basic reading comprehension and literacy and math skills that we all grew up having no choice but to do are now not being done by students in the same way. And I mean, Lucy and I have encountered student projects in our program from seniors in college that are writing entire papers with AI. And so seeing it in that context is, I would say, the word I would use is concerning, but that's not to say I don't see how it can be a tool. So
I hear you so loud and clear on that, because I have a 18-year-old nephew who attempted to do all of his college applications with AI, because I think he wrote all of his senior papers with AI until my sister was like, wait a minute. And it really makes me wonder if everybody's, AI is going to eventually take over. And it's like, yes, it will, if the generation now is not thinking for themselves on anything and just letting AI do it. That is what you've just brought up, Gianna, is what's scariest to me.
Just blindly accepting what it spits out and
never having to create
right
or learn, or I mean, just it does do almost everything now if you let it, so it's really it feels so weird. What do you, if you guys were to imagine yourself at 60 years old, 65, something like that, what do you think is going to be the biggest difference between your life then compared to your parents' lives now? Can you even think that? I mean, with AI kind of messes all that up almost, because it's like, I don't know what it's going to
do. Yeah. I think it's so unpredictable. I think it could go so many ways. I have predictions about maybe turning points that we might encounter. I know in my liberal arts degree, I took a lot of history classes where turning points are a big, framework to analyze what's going on. And I could predict some turning points around AI. I mean, with AI, they feel like these major turning points are happening so quickly, and they just happen every week. I know with government contracts with AI developers, and I know we're maybe about to see a huge IPO of an AI company, and what's going on? So I think there's a lot of turning points that are just going to happen really rapidly. I think I have some concerns for our economic system in terms of things like that, where suddenly we have companies that are so much bigger than any other sector of the economy and kind of seem to be floating the entire economy on these AI companies right now. I think that's concerning. I think the climate crisis is going to pose massive issues for our economic system, because it is going to undermine the underpinnings of the economic system in that. So earlier I was saying, looking at the world through an environmental studies context has helped me a lot, and looking at the economy of this country through an economic or environmental lens has helped me a lot. And looking at, our economy is based on natural resource extraction. We extract fossil fuels, we mine, we extract land, water. These are what makes our economy function. And when we can no longer do that, when we run out of land, and when we are even more, I know in the Southwest, that's a region that's already experiencing overdrawing of water. When that happens everywhere and all of our systems start breaking down, how is the economy going to respond? And I am not an economist, and I have literally no idea, but it feels like it might be different. I have a hunch that I think something's going to happen in that realm, but that's as far as I can get. Gianna?
Yeah, another tough question, but I think given the trajectory that we are currently on, I think I would be surprised if we're not significantly more technologically dependent than we are now. I mean, just in the last couple of years, the shift in AI and the way that we use technology has been so drastic. I remember my brother first introduced ChatGPT to my radar. It was a couple of years ago, and he was like, oh, look, it can write this poem in 2 seconds. And that was the extent of it in my brain. And I had no idea that it would get to the point that it is now and how widely used it is. So I think continuing down that path of being technologically dependent, I think, is something we will see at that age. I also have the concern about the climate crisis, and I think that's something that when we are that age, anyone who has turned a blind eye to it will likely no longer be able to. I think the impacts of it right now seem a bit abstract and not personally relevant to a lot of people. But I think at that point it will be enough that hopefully, and this can be a good and bad thing, obviously, the impacts, especially on lower income communities, are pretty drastic. But I think more people understanding the scope of what's going on and being aware is a good thing. And I see in my own networks passion for making a positive difference and moving the needle in the right direction as something that is very strong, and I think will continue to be, and if anything, expand. So to throw in a little nugget of hope there, I do think that by that point, hopefully that will at least continue to be strong, if not expand a lot by then. Fingers crossed.
I'm curious about something culturally that we see a lot collectively in terms of a dialogue, which is this sort of intergenerational debate, between, like, say, baby boomers and Gen Z or millennials, etc. Triple question. I'm asking the big questions here. It's a 3-parter.
Oh,
I know. I prepped them. I prepped you guys. I'm going to just go there. What do you think people get wrong about your generation? 1. What is something your generation is unfairly criticized for? And what do you feel is a fair criticism of your generation?
Okay. The first question was, what is something people get wrong about us?
Yeah. So what's something people get wrong? What's something you're unfairly criticized for? And what do you think is reasonable critical comment?
Okay. I think there is sometimes I feel lectured about my internet usage from older generations. I'm not really a person who's very online, even. Like, my screen time is rarely above like an hour, but on my phone. Like, on my computer it's more because I have a job, but for like just casual internet use it's pretty low. And but I'm still, I think, even socially, like, I say internet meme references. I know what, like, I'm internet fluent. And sometimes I hear feedback from older folks about, like, it's the damn phones. Like, the phones have ruined you. And it's like, okay, there's some other stuff going on too. I think what gets maybe wrong is, it's not that they're wrong, it's that it's a bit reductive. It's that it gets blamed on the phones and the fact that we're on social media and we're on video games, and those get painted as, or those kind of get demonized, even though my experience on there has been really diverse. There have been awful things that social media has done, and then there have been, like, incredible things. And I still, I'm, like, active on my Reddit in my neighborhood because it's a community platform where we get to connect and, like, talk about goings on. And, like, this is a pretty extreme example, but it helped. We had we had an ICE infiltration of my neighborhood a couple weeks ago, and Reddit was where we organized and protected our neighbors. And it was like, okay, that's a really good tool. But there's also bad things, but it's not all of who we are. We're also very in the real world with each other. We just kind of, it might look different. So that's, I think, something that gets wrong. Something that's maybe an unfair criticism is coming off of that is, like, we're not engaged enough with the real world. Well, that might also be my fair criticism. This is tough. You've asked a question that has led me to contradict myself, which is probably a good thing. Where I think an unfair criticism of us is that we're not engaged in the real world. But then sometimes on the flip side of that, I meet people who use the internet as a way to turn a blind eye, like Gianna was talking about earlier, of, like, there's this whole world where you could play video games all day, and that's probably maybe a reflection of, like, a mental health struggle, and maybe you need better support. But that can also be criticized, that some folks are choosing to look away and choosing to look into like the leisure aspects of the internet, more than I think is probably in our collective best interest. So all of my answers are about the internet, and they're all kind of contradictory and complicated.
Okay, my answers are pretty different. I would say what people get wrong about our generation is probably not the way you intended the question, but one thing that I observe a lot is older generations putting everything on us. And like every time I share what I studied in college or what I care about, they're like, oh yeah, you guys are going to save the world. Like, you guys got us. And I think what they're wrong about is that it's not all on us. While I think we will make a difference and there are a lot of passionate people in our generation, like, I think they're wrong that, they're wrong that it shouldn't be all on us. So that's my answer to that question. I think we're also, this is a completely different topic, but we're unfairly criticized, in my opinion, for being too both lazy and sensitive is something I hear a lot about our generation. And that can come from the workplace and that can come from personal lives and social interactions. But in my opinion, it isn't being overly sensitive or lazy. I think it's having higher standards for quality of life than past generations and not putting up with quite as much, setting more boundaries. And so that can look like, to other generations that didn't have that and that wasn't normalized, that can look like laziness and sensitivity. But in my opinion, it's not. So I think that's an unfair criticism. And then something that I do think this generation lacks, and not everyone, but is social isolation is a big problem. And I think a lot of people in our generation lack initiative to create social environments for themselves, lack some social skills with each other, but also with adults, like older generations. And I think that does come from a culture of what Lucy was talking about, which the internet can be an amazing thing, but it can also be really addictive, like literally chemically addictive and isolating. And that I do believe has impacted our generation.
Yeah, I feel you on that. I feel like I'm kind of from the pass the buck generation to the first question they answered, where it's like, we're like, okay, you guys will do it. It seems like we came out of the 60s where people really started taking charge, right? Like especially women. This is not how this is going to go down, right? And there was so much action, so much real, true take to the streets action. And it was covered by the media. And there was some kind of, I don't know, like dream-like state that we went into in the 80s where, everything was good. And there's certainly a lot of drugs, but so there were so in the 60s and 70s, but where it created a little bit more apathy than I would like to admit. And I feel like the 80s is kind of when that started, like, somebody else will do it. It's carried on and maybe that's where that stems from. I feel like I literally kind of watched that unfold. And anyway, those are fantastic answers. Y'all have, I know, given me a lot to think about, and hopefully our listeners. And let's end with what you're reading, because Lucy made me think about oh gosh, I wonder what she's reading right now. And I'm wondering what Gianna's reading too. So we can end with that. And then maybe our listeners will want to dive in to the pages of what you're looking at.
Yes. I just started a book. I have to go look at my shelf because I forgot what it's called because I just started it. It's by Nadine Gordimer, who's like a really prolific writer. I don't know when she wrote, actually. I think it was the last century, though. She writes a lot about South Africa. And it's really like you can grab onto it. There's good characters. My favorite type, it's like my favorite type of writing. You asked me about what I'm reading, and I'm going to talk to you for like 35 minutes.
No, that's it. Is it historical fiction or is it?
No. I guess. Well, I think it was contemporary for her. It's historical for us now. It's contemporary fiction. Okay. Yeah.
I'm going to answer with two. One, I love dystopian books. And so I'm reading the new Hunger Games, Songbirds and Snakes. I just started. So I don't have much to say about it yet, but I'm very excited. I've heard I will cry. And then on another side of things, I'm very nutrition interested. And so this is an ongoing read and has been for a while, but I will take 10 pages here and there. Fiber Fueled by Will Bulsiewicz. I love his work. And so it's really interesting for me to read about that. So those two.
Very nice. Yeah, he's fantastic. He's been on the pod a couple times. Love him as well. Rafa, do you have something that you want to share that you're reading that we might want to read too?
Yeah. So, little thing that I don't know that I've disclosed to many people. I actually have been studying depth psychology. So I went back to school recently and enrolled in a depth psychology course, and through that discovered the work of Dr. James Hollis. And what is the name of this book? Let me look at the title real quick. It's called The Middle Passage, and it's about the life and spiritual evolution that one goes through in midlife, which I am squarely in right now.
Yes.
So it's providing not only sort of, archetypical frameworks, but goes deep into sort of soul work and religion and mythology, and realizing that, a lot of our hero's journey and mythology and stories that we all grew up with are very much indicative of different points of our life path. So really enjoying Dr. James Hollis, and then about to start a book by Mimi Zhu called Be Not Afraid of Love. So I'm really deep into psychology and relationships and the mechanics of human interrelating. And it's informing a lot of my life and my work, just to get down to the nitty gritty of not only our minds, but our soul's journey in this lifetime.
Very good. You are like I am, where I've got to have a couple going at once because it depends on the mood. Not always in the mood for something. Like I'm just finishing Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know, an Adam Grant book, which I hadn't actually read his former books, but I'm kind of obsessed with the concept of the power that comes with what you don't know. And then I am also reading a historical novel called Silka's Journey. It's World War II. I have a complete obsession with World War II. It can make me very sad from time to time, but this is a fantastic book, and I'm about halfway there. And it's one of those that you all know when you are really into something you love. You're like, when is it nighttime? When is it nighttime? It's like, not like I can't read in the middle of the day, but I won't sit down and just chill and pick it up. So I'm like, when is it? When do I get to dive in? So I'm going to finish it soon. But this has been such a joy. I've learned so much, and I have a few things that I really want to think deeper on and apply to my life. And you all have been great teachers. And thank you for all of your work, for being who you are. And I know Rafa and I are pretty darn proud that we get to call our workplace Switch right alongside you two. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us. And I feel very appreciative that we work at a place where our leaders let us do work like the type of work we do. I think it's really special. So very appreciative.
Aww.
Strongly second that.
Yeah. All right. Until later today.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.